it's interesting. I had the same conversation with Tony Shepherd just not so long ago, actually, on the phone, and obviously he came from it from the GDPR perspective, but we all agreed that we need to do something. But there is absolutely that sort of. You always have to make
Absolutely,
sure.
and I spoke to him probably around the same sort of time. So I was talking to him about exactly the same conversation, and we were saying, there is a fine balance to be had with that, because we don't obviously want to be looking at this and taking lots of data for data's sake. We need to make sure it's very, very useful. We need to make sure people are protected, with the right sorts of information, because any sort of information like this can be, misconstrued, and and that's a real risk with all of this. I mean, we're talking about some of the fundamental questions of machine learning and AI here, in that too much information is not necessarily a bad thing, but actually if it's the interpretation of it, are we looking at this and saying, well, actually all school meals are absolutely terrible, so we've got to do X, Y, Z? No, we're not saying that at all. What we're saying is how can we provide the right information for teachers, head teachers, school staff to make the right decisions on an individual basis? Can we have some national baselines across all these different areas? Yes, we can. Fantastic. And so we can see what the national average is, where targets should be met. And if an individual is kind of falling below in some reason, that's not a bad thing. But what we need to do is to say, how can we help and improve them? And it's all the same things that schools have always wanted to do since the dawn of time, is how do we make sure that each individual is achieving what they can do, and do it in a happy environment, and it always gets overlooked in schools, is how do they do it in a way that's not ridiculously strict and going back to kind of 50s and 60s teaching in schools, but actually is done in a way that is positive for each individual. Schools still want to do all of that, of course they do. And so all this is talking about is actually how can we just make sure they've got all the information at their fingertips in an easy fashion, so that they can see trends that otherwise they wouldn't see. And that's what we're talking about.
I agree, and that ease of use has to be paramount, because they're busy people. We know that, but they're there to teach children, and that's not an easy job. They've got a really hard job. But the more information we can give them to make it not necessarily easier, because I don't think it necessarily will ever be easier, but at least direct to get the best out of that each child, I think is a very positive thing.
Yeah.
Do you think government should be using more of this data as well then? Because, government, I know they had the data, they want to create that data lake and then do some of this analysis, but could they actually use these commercial organizations like your Arbors, your Bromcoms, your Sims, the RSs and so on? Should they be working with them closer to build some of this information?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's for a number of years I was working when I was working at Group 1. Even before that, I was kind of working a little bit with the DfE on their data exchange project, which has just been going on for, well, you remember that. You remember back in your days as well. So it was, it just keeps winding on and on and on. And, there's such a great opportunity, and there's a great appetite for everybody in the marketplace to be doing better things with data for everybody's benefit. But the DfE just doesn't seem to be interested in doing the right things for it. They constantly expect the private sector to be picking up the tabs for all of this, and then expecting to just be able to hook on the side of it just because, oh, well, the government wants it. Well, they're private organizations, they're businesses, they're not there to help government at the bottom line. So, where's the incentive to work with them on this? And there's such a great opportunity to do such great things on this. Again, the DfE is also very focused, and government as a whole is very focused on what, the key things that they've always been focused on. There's no appetite, I feel, to want to look at these new areas unless it is done as kind of as a scientific study. That's the only time that these things, as far as I ever see, ever get picked up by government. It's a scientific study, it's a university study, and then all of a sudden the government potentially is embarrassed by it, and then all of a sudden launches some sort of task force to do something with it. And all this data is already here, and it's been here for years and years and years, and it's just that nobody's picking it up to want to do anything with it at a national level. And I think there's big stories, and unfortunately it only ever comes around when people stand up and speak out. Years ago it was Jamie Oliver who spoke up very, very well about school meals, the status of school meals in schools, and he's done wonderful wonderful things, with what he with the campaigns that he has done and transformed, how school meals are prepared, what they contain, etc., etc. Safeguarding for lots and lots of bad reasons, in schools has now, really come to the forefront over the past kind of few years. And that's not to say that safeguarding wasn't important, but it certainly has really hit headlines. And so again, there's initiatives in schools, in school leadership, to make sure that that's very, very well run, well managed, well documented. There's systems out there. My Concern and CPOMs in particular, behavior watch even, that can record these things very, very well. But it takes people stand up or bad things to happen for these things to occur, and that's almost what I'm a little bit tired of seeing, is that these things only happen when there's almost an emergency, or there's an incident, or there is a national outcry about this. We know all of this sort of stuff, and we could be doing such fantastic things with school data, with data on individuals in the right way. I think potentially as well, over the last few years with the likes of Cambridge Analytica as well, and that whole debacle that, the average person, the public would be resistant to kind of large scale projects like this, and so nobody's willing to kind of stand up and take a risk on that without kind of looking properly at what the benefits that this offers. And it comes back to the whole reason that I started the MIS project, which was, I'm not interested necessarily in social commentating. I'm not interested in kind of X, Y, and Z. What I'm interested in is showing the facts so very clearly that you answer the questions yourself. If you can see that, nutrition in schools is still pretty poor, then the data will show that. And if I can show that in such a way that you can see that, I don't need to commentate on it at all. None of us need to. You can see that that's bad with this. So then the change needs to happen.
And it comes back to the government. If the government could actually see the data on a day-to-day, weekly, monthly, whatever basis they wanted to collect it on, well, not even collect it, just see it. Most of the systems are now in the cloud, apart from one. And ultimately getting access to that information is purely up to them if they want it to happen. Technically it's achievable. And if they could then run, like say, machine learning over it, or whatever they wanted to do, they could actually see how effective their policies are on a more immediate terms, and then they can adapt them, or even do policies in small places and change the way that they want, or create some policy for a certain area of the country and just see what effect it has. Again, going back to the demographics and saying, well, actually, this demographic are falling behind. What can we do? Let's try these different interventions just in those demographics, and then see from the data if it's effective or not. I think it's a really powerful tool for the government to actually stop. Now that's not working. Try this now, and working with educationalists, working with companies, but becoming a bit more, collaborative.
Well, becoming more collaborative, and what that allows them to do is to become more agile. In product management terms, it becomes more agile, because you're absolutely right. There is absolutely nothing wrong with kind of looking at the data and saying, okay, either we don't know what to do. Oh, that's a good answer. The first, the first most important question, is to say is, I don't know. That's fantastic. Let's go and find out what we should do. Then we go and try, something. We put, like you say, you can put a regional policy in, see what difference that makes. It might not work, and that's absolutely fine, because we've tried it, it didn't work, or it maybe didn't have the results that we expected. Fantastic. We've not rolled it out nationally for it to be then failed, and B, we can tweak and adjust that as we go along, much more iteratively, and that relies on you seeing the changes as they happen, not kind of running a study for 2 years and saying, oh yeah, we know that all inner city schools are run down or whatnot, or no offense to inner city schools, that's just an example, but it's that's what then happens. And 2 years later, we're still no further down the line. We knew this already. Everyone that's working in those schools knew that already, and they're no better off than they were 2 years ago. Whereas actually, if we had similar data to across the board to show how children are being affected, teachers are being affected as well. I mean, just look at this year. If we had this sort of data this year, surveying teachers, the Teacher Tap app that I see so much of, they've done a fantastic job this year of surveying their teachers through lockdown, through COVID, through having schools open for key workers and things like that, and how they've got on with all of that. Government should be knowing this before anybody else. It shouldn't be relying on a commercial organisation to run and actually get these surveys. And that's just a poor state of affairs by not just the education department, but all of the government. Is that they're usually the last ones to understand what's actually happening on the ground, but they're the ones that are making the decisions.
I totally agree with you 100%. It's interesting, and I can't say who or where or anything, but it's like I've seen data on pupil premium and how that is, that in some ways it's not being used appropriately. If that got out, that'd be big. But if government had that already, they could manage that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's that sort of thing, and they could basically act upon it, and that's what they should be doing.
But it comes back down to kind of data policies as a whole, doesn't it, as well? Because I was for a short period of time last year. I was a governor in a local primary school. Absolutely fantastic role, and I'd love to go back to doing that one day soon. But they were feeling that pupil premium money was rightly accounted for and did a great job of doing it, really, almost down to the penny, which was fantastic to see, making sure it was going to the right places. But for me, there's something still a little bit wrong with the system, in that there's so much time and expenditure spent on making sure that happens, rather than making sure that the kids are getting that money and they are A, enjoying their school life, and B, achieving their school life. There seems to be inordinate amount of money on bureaucracy and making sure every penny is kept. Now, of course, you have to have that because it's money, and people will abuse the system, and people have abused the system. Schools have, and that's a really, really sorry thing to do, particularly for schools, and particularly right now, when schools just don't have enough money, worse than I've ever seen in my entire career. That right now, and over the last couple of years, it's been so bad. But I think it also, at the same time, there could be much more efficient ways of doing this and tracking all of this that is also standardized as well. The school that I was at, they had to come up with their own systems and their own spreadsheets and things like that. And I'm like, well, in 2020, how is there not just some sort of central system that you can kind of go, well, here is how much pupil premium I've claimed, here is how much I've used, and here's the reasons for me doing it. It's you do your taxes easier than you deal with that, and that's just a sad state of affairs.
I think there's also the unconscious sort of biases, they're around, which is no one's fault as such. That's just society as it is, and actually government needs to understand that. At the end of the day, it's very easy to say, right, here's some money. You definitely need to go there now, use this appropriately. But there's always that sort of unconscious bias of, where, you think you're doing the right thing, but actually maybe there's some form of bias in there in the way that you act. And in which case, then, that's not necessarily working as well as maybe everybody would like it to be. But, that's quite an important piece, I think, the unconscious bias. And I think data can easily pull that out and say, look, actually, this child over here, you haven't actually given them as much support as actually they are afforded to, and you need to basically change that slightly.